In this lesson, we'll create a new local site in Dreamweaver and bring the files that we've been working on up till now into that site. In case your panel configuration looks different than mine, I'm going to work using the designer panel configuration. We are going to be working closely in the code view in Dreamweaver, which we'll get into shortly. But for right now, if it's not already selected, select the designer panel configuration and observe that the Files panel is now displayed on the right-hand side of your screen. What we need to do when working with Dreamweaver is tell Dreamweaver where our local files are. When we worked with Notepad or TextEdit, we didn't do that because we took responsibility, without necessarily realizing it, at every stage of the game for knowing where our stuff is and going to that stuff, being our HTML files, images, style sheets, and managing them where they are. Now, we want to let Dreamweaver pick up some of that manual work so we can focus on creating our web pages and let Dreamweaver do some of the heavy lifting for us. But before we can get going, we need to tell Dreamweaver where we want our files to be, and in our case right now, tell Dreamweaver where our pre-existing files are. When we work with Dreamweaver, we work on what's referred to as a local site. That's the Dreamweaver way of describing what we've been doing up till now outside of Dreamweaver using TextEdit and Notepad. When we configure a local site, which we'll do in a moment in Dreamweaver, we're essentially telling Dreamweaver, I want you to look at the following location and save existing or new material to this location. So, to get started, if you don't already have any pre-existing sites, and if this is the first time you've used Dreamweaver, you likely don't, we're going to click on the Manage Sites link. If you do have a pre-existing site, that site would be listed here underneath the pull-down list displayed on the Files panel. But since we don't have any pre-existing sites, and we know we don't because we don't see any folders highlighted in green, we're going to click on the Manage Sites link, which brings up the Manage Sites dialog, which allows us to click on the New button and create a new site. When you click on the New button, you get a pop-up. The first option is Site. We're going to select that option. And we're now presented with a new site definition dialog box. Now there are two tabs to this box, Basic and Advanced. And there's nothing advanced about the Advanced tab because it presents the exact same information that we input underneath the Basics tab. The only difference is the Basic tab presents us with the fields in sort of a wizard format, and the Advanced tab presents us with the fields that we need to configure our site in Dreamweaver all at once, which is the way we want to do things. So let's click on the Advanced tab. And now we're going to tell Dreamweaver where our site is on our computer. We start with the local info category, which is selected by default. And we're going to give this site that we're going to define in Dreamweaver a name. Now this name is in no way part of the website. It's essentially a name that exists only in Dreamweaver, which describes the site that we are working on. In this case, I might give the site name the same name as the folder in which my files reside. I'm doing that only to help myself understand the file structure in which my files are placed. Whenever possible, you want to help yourself understand the context in which you're working, because you may work on multiple sites for multiple different clients, and the more information you can give to yourself at a glance, the better off you'll be. So, I'm going to specify a site name of chapter 09 _ lesson 2. Now, I'm going to specify a local root folder, which is essentially the file location on the computer on which you're working where your files reside. In our case, we're going to specify the Chapter 9 folder. To do this, you could either type in the URL to the Chapter 9 folder on your computer, or you could click on the folder icon, which is much easier, to the immediate right of that field, the local root folder field, and then browse to the location on your desktop where the Chapter 9 folder resides, and click Choose. You also want to define a default images folder, which should reside within the local root folder of your website. The reason why we need to define a default images folder is that there is functionality in Dreamweaver which was not available to us in a plain flat text editor that requires Dreamweaver to know the precise location of the default images folder, because you may have multiple directories of images in your folder, but you want to tell Dreamweaver that if it has to make a decision about where to import an image, import it into whatever folder you list in the default images folder field. So like with the local root folder field, we'll click on the folder to the right of the default images folder field to specify a default images folder. Now we want that default images folder to be within the local root folder of our site, which in this case is the Chapter 9 folder in the lesson files for this tutorial. And I can see inside that directory there is an images directory. So I will select it and click Choose on the Mac. So I have given my site a name. I've specified a local root folder. In this case, Chapter 9. I'm clicking and dragging with my mouse so I can see the far right-hand side of the text in the local root folder field. And I'm going to click and drag in the default images folder so I can see that the images folder within the Chapter 9 folder, which is my local root folder field, is specified, and it is in that images directory where Dreamweaver will deposit any image that you import into your Dreamweaver site. Now at this time I'll click on OK so that I can see my site is now listed underneath the Manage Sites dialog, and I'll now click on Done. And now I can see on the pull-down list, which is displayed on the Files panel on the right-hand side of my screen, the site name Chapter 9 Lesson 2 is now displayed. And if I click on that folder name and release, I'm delivered back to the Manage Sites dialog where I originally configured this site. Now this behavior only works on the Mac, not on Windows. I don't actually want to edit this site, but I just wanted to show you that you can get back to it very quickly if you need to make a change. So I'm going to click Cancel, and now I'm going to position my mouse above the panel CSS Styles, which is collapsed. I can uncollapse that panel by double-clicking on the title CSS Styles, which expands the panel, or I can collapse it again by double-clicking on the title. I'm going to position my mouse above that panel, and I get an upward and downward arrow key. This allows me to click with my mouse button and drag so that I can resize the panel, giving me a little bit more real estate to view the files that are in my site below. Likewise, I can position my mouse on the left-hand side, and I get a horizontal set of arrows which allow me to click and drag to see more space inside my Files panel, so I can click and drag the column heads in that panel and view the list of files in my site.